Hi, folks. This is Pastor Dave Grisham for God and Country Ministries, and today I'm giving you an update on today's events at Bartlesville. The battle for Bartlesville, the saga continues. And I'm going to tell you about what happened today in court. Now, I want to remind anybody watching this that I am not doing this on behalf of Rich Pinkowski, who is still under a protective order, at least for the next 2 weeks. And he's not allowed to talk about this directly on social media because there is what I believe is an unconstitutional gag order on him. But anyway, I'm telling you what I witnessed myself. This is my own personal testimony about what I have seen because I've been here with him through this whole thing. So that's why I am talking about this and not Rich, because he is still under this gag order, at least temporarily, and I am not. So let me give you a little background on what was going on with this prior to today. So Rich Pinkowski and Ryan and Jim Gillis and myself were all preaching in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in front of a drag queen show that was a Christmas program, and children were invited. Unfortunately, they did show up. This was a very vile event, so we were preaching there. And at the end of the event, a police officer approached Rich, asked him to identify himself, and he did. And then he handed him a documentation saying that he was being served with a protective order, a temporary protective order, which is apparently pretty easy to get, by Judge Vaclaw. Now, Judge Vaclaw is the one in Washington County in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. He is the only one who does issue the protective orders. He's the one that deals with this all the time. So this order came from him and from his office, his clerk. So Rich has been unable to speak directly about this on social media because part of this order contains like I said, what I believe is an unconstitutional social media gag order where he cannot talk about this, which I think is an infringement of his free speech rights. In any case, these two lesbians who sit on the board of directors for Oklahomans for Equality are the ones that filed this petition. Now, at the beginning of the day, I want to tell about a little incident that happened prior to us arriving in court. We had gotten some information that we had dug up on our own that Oklahomans for Equality, of course, it's listed on their website. It was listed on their website that their Bartlesville office was at 600 Johnstone Street, which just happens to be the Bartlesville Public Library. So we kind of wondered, how can an activist group who is working to directly compromise the children of Bartlesville with their filth, how can they be housed or have an office in a city-funded building that would mean the taxpayers were paying for their office for this activist group who was actively working against Bartlesville's taxpayers' children? Well, that didn't seem right. So we started investigating. Well, their office was listed there temporarily. It was taken off the website, which we didn't know why. It suddenly disappeared after we started our investigation of this. So we went to the library, and I went in and asked the information desk, hey, where's Oklahomans for Equality? Where's their office? It's listed on their website as being in this building. And the lady looked it up on her computer, and she said, I don't see anything like that here. So she called her supervisor, and her supervisor talked to her for a couple of minutes, and then her supervisor wanted to speak to me. And her supervisor got on the phone with me and told me that they did not have an office and that they did not ever have an office. They did not know why they had listed that there, but they had contacted Oklahomans for Equality and asked them to remove that address from their website, which they did. So that's been corrected. Don't know why they did that. Not sure exactly why. It seemed kind of nefarious, but in any case, it's no longer happening, and apparently they didn't have an office there. So then we went on to the courthouse, where we tried to obtain a court reporter because we wanted to document this. When Rich went in, he was supposed to go in at 2 o'clock, and they had us waiting in this conference room, but we went and spoke to the court reporter office first and tried to get a court reporter to go up there and document everything. We were willing to pay for it. So in case they ruled against Rich, we could file an appeal. So they said that you have to talk to the bailiff and take care of that through the bailiff. So we went up on the 3rd floor, tried to talk to the bailiff. They put us in a conference room where they separated the parties out. That's what their policy is. They have the plaintiffs in one conference room, and they have the other people in the other conference room. So we stayed in the conference room with the people that had protective orders against them. And so we sat in there for a while, and we talked, and then the bailiff came in because we'd asked for her, and she told us that there were no court reporters available because they had a shortage of court reporters. And we informed her that the reason we wanted one is because we were concerned that if this ruling went against Rich, that we wanted to file an appeal, and we needed that documentation for an appeal. That's very important for an appeals court to look at that documentation and see that official court document to make sure they know exactly what was said in the courtroom, what the judge said, what the plaintiff said, what the defendant said, what everybody said in the courtroom. It was official. And so she left and apparently, I guess, went and talked to the judge. I don't know. And before we went in, one of the bailiff deputies came in and said, oh, by the way, there's no audio taping or videotaping in the courtroom at all, even though there were no signs, because we were watching for signs for this. And there were no signs or anything like that in the courtroom stating you could not do that. We just had this deputy come up and tell us. And everybody else that was in the room that had been there before, there was one guy who had been in there 3 or 4 times before. He said, that's new. I've never heard that before. No one's ever told us that. So we kind of got the inkling that they just really didn't want us to do that in this particular case because there was no court reporter and they just didn't really want this documented. That was how we felt. Not sure about that, but that's what it seemed like. That had the appearance of that. Well, a couple of days before, there had been an article that came out, a very detailed article about what was going on with this drag queen shows in Bartlesville and all these different things that were happening. And one of the things that was in this article was a photograph that we had dug up about Judge Vaclaw, however you pronounce his name. Anyway, we took this photograph and we gave it to this reporter. I gave it to this reporter myself. And this reporter wrote this article, and part of it focused on this. And what was in this photograph was the judge himself who had issued the protective order, the temporary protective order, the judge himself posing with the entire board of directors of Oklahomans for Equality, this LGBT activist group. And the 2 plaintiffs that were applying for this PPO, protective order, were in the photograph, cozying up to the judge. So it kind of had a bad optic. It kind of looked like, they had this judge on their side because they hosted him for an event between the judge and them, a bullying kind of thing. So we get into the courtroom, and we're pretty sure this article had an influence on this. We get into the courtroom, and the judge sits down, and of course we sit down where the audience is supposed to sit, and Rich and the plaintiffs are sitting up front towards the judge. And the judge asked the plaintiffs, do you want to continue forward with pursuing this petition? And they said yes. He asked Rich, do you want to continue with opposing this, or you want to continue to contest this? And he said yes. He said, well, then I have no choice at this point but to recuse myself from these proceedings. And he said it was because although he did not have a personal relationship with the plaintiffs, he knew the plaintiffs. And so he wanted to recuse himself to make sure there was no conflict of interest. And he said, now, everybody comes to me with these petitions, these protective order requests, and our office grants them, gives these temporary ones, so they all come to me anyway. But I want to assign this to a different judge. And he asked if everybody was okay with February 15th being the next hearing date. So that's why I'm making this video, because Rich can't talk about this. As I said, I'm just telling you about what I saw because I was in the courtroom. I was there when he got served. I was there when he was in court. And I'm telling you what I saw. And so the judge recused himself from this and assigned it for February the 15th. So he's still under this protective order for 2 more weeks. And this was actually a huge victory. Because if the judge recused himself for this case, then he's going to have to recuse himself in the future if anyone else try on this particular board that posed with him in these pictures, if they tried this similar tactic. And we think we know exactly why they were doing this, which I'll get to in a moment, because this is something that we spoke to a news reporter after the court case. So he recused himself, and basically the entire thing was dismissed. And he allowed the plaintiffs to leave first. They left the building, and then we were told to go sit at the back of the courtroom and wait until the judge thought it was okay, till they had enough time to get their cars and leave so that no one would violate the protective orders. They couldn't have any contact. And they left. Now, these 2 lesbians were not happy. They were very upset at the end of this proceeding because this did not go the way they thought. I'm pretty sure they thought they had their little good buddy, the judge, all in their back pocket, but apparently he was not in their back pocket. And he recused himself from this, so they're not going to get their favorite judge to do this. They're going to have to get another judge. And when they looked at me, I looked at them directly, and they gave me the stink eye like you wouldn't believe. There was no verbal contact. I didn't say anything to them. They didn't say anything to me. But if looks could kill, I'd have been murdered in the courtroom. I mean, it was bad. They had daggers coming out of their eyes. In any case, we waited until they left, and we went outside, and we spoke to, I guess, a guy named Andrew, who was, he is a reporter for the Examiner, the Bartlesville Examiner. And he kind of let it slip that he had heard that their true intentions about this had nothing to do with safety, that it had everything to do with keeping Rich from coming back to Bartlesville and preaching at the gay pride events. You see, because if this petition, for this protective order, if it's given any kind of teeth to it, is any kind of permanency. Now, under Oklahoma law, it can be for up to 5 years. Generally, they do this 1 year to 5 years, somewhere in that range, whatever they think is appropriate on these protective orders. So if this thing had gone for at least a year minimum, Rich would not be able to preach at their gay pride this year. And I think that was the goal. Because that's exactly what Andrew kind of let it slip, that it was his understanding that they really were not interested in safety. This didn't have anything to do with them feeling threatened, because this whole thing was about 2 Bible scriptures, Matthew 18:6 and Romans 1:32. You can look those up yourself. Those are warnings from God. Those are not threats. If you quote that, you're not threatening anyone. You're warning them about the judgment of God. And so, but that's what this was all about. This is what's so concerning about this, is because if they do win this, then basically they can be able to go anywhere in Oklahoma, at least, and it's liable to catch on in other places. They can file protective orders against Christians and prevent them from quoting certain Bible scriptures because they consider it a threat, so to speak. And that's an attack on the Bible, a direct attack on our faith. So we want to make sure we win this. We want to make sure this doesn't go through. So in any case, we were standing outside talking to Andrew. Now, before we went inside, Andrew sat outside the conference room where we could see him through the door. And he made the comment to Rich through the door that, "Oh, I'm kind of surprised you're here, you know." And he's like, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, word on the street is that you were not going to show up." So I think he had been in contact with this LGBT group, Oklahomans for Equality, And they had told him, oh, we don't think he's going to show up. But he did. We all did, because we're not going to let this lie. I don't think they know who they're dealing with here. So in any case, Andrew let it slip that their true intention had nothing to do with safety. It had everything to do with denying Rich his ability to come to Bartlesville and speak at their events. Either at city council events where they would show up, so he couldn't show up to speak at a city council meeting anymore because they would be there. He couldn't even show up and watch the proceedings because they would be there, and he would violate the order and he could go to jail. Or if he showed up at a gay pride event in town or at another drag queen thing in town and they were there, he'd be violating the order and he could get arrested. We think that's what they were trying to do, is basically to stifle his free speech. Well, this was a big victory today, in that their little judge that they thought they had in their back pocket is not in their back pocket, and this has been taken off the table. And now, because he recused himself from these two, he'll have to recuse himself for everybody else that was in that photograph. If anybody else, any one of the other ones, decide to get this stupid idea in their head, they're just going to have to throw that right out the window, because it's not going to work, at least not with this judge. So they were very upset when they left. So that's where it stands today. So on the 15th of February, Rich is going to go back to court, and he's going to have to fight this thing. And we are praying that it is going to get dismissed. Although we're going to make sure that there is a court reporter on duty and hired. We're going to do this in advance, and we're going to make sure that there is one scheduled to go in there to document everything in case this judge gets a wild hair up his rear and decides he's going to approve this and then violate my brother in Christ, his freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of association, all of that. He decides to just violate his rights. Even though he's had no direct contact with these people, he has made no threats against them. He hasn't posted anything on their page, although they have come on his page and done a bunch of things, which he gave a bunch of copies of that stuff to this reporter to show exactly what they were doing and how they've done. They have done exactly to Rich what they've accused him of. Matter of fact, there's actually a death threat made by one of the people from their group, not necessarily on the board, but from that group, their supporters have made actual death threats against Rich, and it was documented on Facebook. It was screenshotted, and it was given to that reporter. So we don't know what kind of article he's going to write over that. We don't know what's going to happen, but we're anxiously awaiting to see. In any case, until this order gets lifted, if there are any more updates, I will make a video myself of anything that I personally witness, or I personally hear, or I personally research myself, because that's what I've been doing. Because we don't want Rich to violate this order. He is, after all, unlike his opponents, he is actually law-abiding and not lawless like the LGBT community is. So anyway, God bless you all. You have a good night. Continue to pray for us as the Battle of Bartlesville continues and the saga goes on. Stay tuned for the next chapter. God bless you all. You have a good night.